Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. A warm welcome to you all. I'm Ali Thomas from RHE, and as usual, I'll be your chair again for the RHE Housing Roundtable. It's great to see that the event seems really popular again this morning. We're trying our best to keep a steady stream of fascinating guest speakers for you. Don't forget, we also offer a community safety roundtable quarterly too. And at the moment, we're expanding our digital offer to help keep you all informed of current relevant topics. So you can now follow us on Spotify for podcasts and also watch us on YouTube if you prefer to add faces to voices. So our speaker today is Paul Oatt. Paul holds a bachelor's degree in environmental health, a master's degree in public health and health services management, and is currently undertaking his PhD. Paul's a fellow of the CIEH and associate member of the Faculty of Public Health, and he's lectured on the subjects of environmental health, housing, construction and housing enforcement at both Middlesex University and Cardiff Metropolitan University. He also provides training on housing and environmental health related subjects, including damp and mould, HMO regulation and housing enforcement. Paul has over 20 years experience as a local authority environmental health officer up to management level and is experienced in public health interventions relating to housing and pollution through the improvement of standards of both owner occupied and privately rented housing. And he's the author of Selective Licensing, the basis for a collaborative approach to addressing health inequalities. And Paul's going to share some valuable insights from his PhD research into the pressures faced by enforcement teams, as well as practical strategies for strengthening services amongst staffing pressures, complex legislation and rising demand to help you all gain a better understanding of how housing services can adapt to those shifting expectations. Just before I pass over to Paul, I'd like to remind you all that you're welcome to pop your questions for him in the chat for us to pick up on later on in this session. So Paul, I'll pass over to you now.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that introduction. Wonderful. Okay, I'll just start to share my screen. Hopefully that's going to work. You can all see that. It worked earlier, so yeah, I always need that little bit of reassurance that it is working. So,
I can see it, Paul, don't worry.
Brilliant. Phew, thank you very much. Okay, so the title of my thesis is Responding to the Local Authority Private Sector Housing Regulatory Knowledge and Skills Shortage to Deliver Better Enforcement. The alternative title is How Did We Get into This Mess in the First Place? But that's the one we're going with. And yeah, as Ali mentioned, I've had a few publications now. The first one, the Selective Licensing, the basis for a collaborative approach to addressing health inequalities, was basically my thesis for my master's. And my second book, Private Sector Housing and Health, Evaluating the Effectiveness of Regulation Intended to Protect the Health of Tenants, is kind of a spin-off from this current research that I'm doing, because I was accumulating lots and lots of information from lots and lots of different sources, and quite a lot of it didn't fit the research questions that I've got. But it was worthy of publication in itself, particularly with the Renters Reform Bill as it was then was going through Parliament, and so there's quite a lot of stuff about how tenants' health is affected, and there's not a lot of research that's been carried out on that. There's quite a lot in America, but not a lot in the UK. So this was to sort of add a little bit to widen the evidence base a bit, because I had all this stuff and it had nowhere for it, no other place for it to go. So that was so that became a publication. I also do some blogs. Again, there's lots and lots of stuff in housing. If you're going to research housing, it's not got a wide enough evidence base, but it will whatever you do, guarantee you will start to find lots and lots of other things that are worthy of research as well. And some of this I've put into a blog that is available on LinkedIn, which I've called Game of Homes, which sort of ran last year. I might get back to it at some point. I don't know. And just lastly, another publication that was created with a collaboration with Dr. Jill Stewart, who engaged me to help with creating a couple of books, because we had identified that there is quite a skills shortage amongst local authority practitioners, and one of the things, it's something I want to talk about later. This was about construction and deficiencies, and it's a simple workbook. It's free download. If you don't know about it yet, if you're not aware of it, I'll put this into the chat as a link, because it's free download. I think, is it coming up? Yes, I can type in. I've got a couple of other things to put into the chat as well. So that's a free download, these books, and they're basically workbooks, and it's kind of our attempt to bridge some of the knowledge gaps that we're noticing, and my research is going to talk a little bit about that as well. Okay, so title of my research, gone through that. My primary and secondary research questions. So my primary research question was, what lessons can be learned from the disparate and developing implementation processes of local authority regulatory enforcement models for the private rented sector? So, and then the second question really was, what are the barriers, perceived or otherwise, amongst street level housing enforcers in carrying out preventative strategies for the protection of public health? I'll explain a little bit more about street level housing enforcers in a moment. So these were my two research questions to try to find out what's going on in local authority housing regulation at the moment. And then I did this thing called a MESI map. So originally, the MESI map is basically a cognitive exercise whereby if you're going to research something, you just draw all the things that that are involved in that element of research, and try to map it out and have a look and see where you sit, where your research sits in all of that. And this is a tidied up version, because my scrawly pen and paper pencil version is probably only legible only to me. So I tidied it up and created this one. So essentially, street level housing enforcement officers. Now, this is my catch-all term for people working in local authority housing regulation today, because we've got all sorts of titles. You've got environmental technical officers still, you've got private sector housing officers, you've got compliance officers, you've got senior private sector housing officers, you've got environmental health officers, environmental health practitioners, regulatory services officers, principal officers, so many different titles, and we're all kind of working in housing regulation. So I needed a catch-all title, because I couldn't keep writing that all the time in the write-up. So street level housing enforcement officers is the catch-all sort of reference point for us for private sector housing teams and regulatory functions. So we sit here in the middle, and all of these kind of yellowy things here are things that are sort of external things that are influencing what we do. So the housing crisis, there's a two-way arrow there between MP and councillor inquiries, because they get quite a lot of queries, and that comes through to us as well. We get requests from the general public. Sometimes one of the things that we find now is that they get through to us here. They might not be happy with our answer, and because we triage, because we've got a lot of demand, and they'll go through to their councillor and try to circumvent, and then it comes through to us anyway. So we've got quite a lot of that going on. We've got government and political pressure, legislation and statutory duty. At the same time, there's been this thing about cutting red tape for the last 15-20 years. They want us to regulate on the one hand, but at the same time they want us to cut. So it's always been a very difficult dynamic to balance. And so, of course, local government policymakers have to make sense of all of this, and then it all feeds into what we do. And then we've got these green areas here, which are to do with education and experiential learning. So education, training and CPD, that feeds into our work. And obviously that feeds out as well, because obviously we use our work to articulate some of this stuff for our training. We've also got multi-agency partners and shared intelligence for those local authorities that work that way. That's a two-way information sharing partnership there. We've got experiential learning, because all of this stuff in yellow generates cases, and cases lead to us working. We get experiential learning that feeds back into what we do. It also feeds back into our training, and that kind of goes on. So there's a bit more about that later. So we've got cases, and then of course at street level we are making housing enforcement decisions. We are inspecting and we are determining what we're going to do. And some of us will go and maybe take an informal route. Some of us might go straight to formal action depending on the severity of what we're finding. So if we go to an informal route, we might get to a point where there is no non-compliance, and so that that arrow comes back, that comes back to bite you, and then we have to go straight to formal action because we've had no engagement. Sometimes we go formally and we get non-compliance. So obviously that's going to result in a prosecution or a fine, and then hopefully we'll get compliance after that. Sometimes we don't have to go down that route. We might take informal or formal action, and we might reach compliance, and then job done, happy days. We've done what we needed to do. So this was just trying to, for me, to get my head around, what we're doing, the sort of the influences, and then the implementation, the effects and the implementation of what goes on. And so I then had to design my study. So the study effectively is a literature review. So that was the beginning point, and that raised a lot of questions. And then I did a policy analysis using Morstein's relationship between the 6 analytical dimensions. And I've used this before in my selective licensing book. And the reason I used this one is because our legislation, the things that our theoretical stuff, the law, it's all sort of scattered amongst different sources. There's no sort of one go-to source effectively. And Morstein's framework is very good for that. You can draw in lots and lots of different elements of data, different policies, different things to fuel your analysis. And so you look at it in different ways. You've got effects and implementation. So the effectiveness of it, the unintended effects, equity, then the acceptability. And the acceptability is our acceptability as professionals, as practitioners, as housing enforcers, and the acceptability of tenants and of landlords, policymakers, everyone basically, costs that are involved, and the feasibility. And so I did this analysis, and then I did an online survey, which I'll come to in a moment. I did some one-to-one interviews, some focus groups, and then I used some coding and reflexive thematic analysis to draw it all up together. So I'm not at the end of this yet. I'm actually just in the final write-up phase. I'm sort of doing the discussion and coming to the conclusion. So I'm not going to be able to talk about all of my conclusions at the moment. I'm going to talk about a few things that I think are quite important for, the things that I think are imminent issues. If not, well, they're issues now and definitely in the future. And so this is going to be this is going to be the subject of what I'm going to talk about. So just setting the scene, we've got upstream and downstream approaches in tackling health inequalities. This is from Surinder Daisy's work, which was quite influential on my thesis, and she talks about how environmental health activities are geared towards prevention of harm and providing conditions for citizens to live healthy and long lives. And actions tend to be structural, dealing with the causes of the issues, and are thus known as upstream. So we've got upstream interventions, and downstream interventions are basically the effects of it. So this is the bridge. It's broken, it's collapsed, and people are falling into the water, and they're being fished out by public health services at the bottom of the stream. So that's what they do. What we would be doing is we would probably be cordoning off this area here. We'd be serving a notice on someone to fix the bridge, and we'd be preventing people from falling down the river. And so it's almost like it never happened. And that creates a kind of layer of invisibility. It's something that can sort of, we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot a little bit with this, because we don't talk enough about what we do, and it creates a level of invisibility, because of course we are there to prevent something. So as soon as we prevent something, it never happened. So it's difficult. So we've got this thing called the invisible profession, which Surinder Daisy and Taylor Smith talk about. And it's environmental health obscured by political externalities. It creates professional invisibility. And a lot of that's through fragmentation of services and disconnects between agencies and historical cuts that stripped our services back to statutory functions. And it kind of, that goes back, a few years now, 15 years or so. But it's creating a problem for us visibly. A lot of people during COVID felt that we as a profession, the environmental profession, didn't really have as much of a voice as we should have done during the during those arrangements for bronze teams, gold teams, silver teams, or whatever it might be. So we had sorry, my phone's. Sorry about that. I've just muted my phone. Right. So the invisibility of the profession. So we didn't have as much of a prominent role. A lot of people felt in what was going on then, and it's sort of indicative of something that's been happening for a while. The CIEH Workforce Survey of 2020 shows that there has been a sort of decrease in skills in local authorities. It goes back to probably over a decade ago, when there was quite a lot of cuts and there was quite a lot of voluntary redundancies, and a lot of people, began to leave the profession. And then we started to recruit from other areas as well. So we've got, so this, if you're not familiar with I expect the figures have probably changed a bit now, probably not for the better, but 52% of local authorities said they had barriers to training and development for EHPs in their authority. There's a lot of agency staff were being used back then. 80% were using it, and some of it was to cover maternity leave. Some of it was because of specialist knowledge. I'm really sorry. I thought I muted that. Right. So 80% of that. So 87% of local authorities said that agency staff were used because of shortages of resources or delays in recruitment. And this problem with specialist knowledge. And then, of course, we also have difficulties in recruiting officers with required qualifications. So there's been a problem, and we've got things like recruitment freezes as well. So local authorities struggling to get people into roles, and there's a lot of people that I spoke to when I interviewed people in focus groups saying that they've still got unfilled vacancies today, going back a few years. And so, to kind of articulate what was going on, I created this this slide here, which is the education and experiential learning spectrum, just to see where we are. So most of us, most of us in local authorities, we came into private sector housing as almost as a career change for a lot of people. A lot of people, and particularly environmental health as well. Definitely, certainly when I was studying it at my first degree, most of us were all having a career change of some sort. So we came into this profession, if you like, with transferable skills. And once you come in, whatever it is that gets you through the door, you will probably spend a bit of time shadowing an experienced officer, and you will do things like the HHSRS 2-day course, and you'll do short courses, and potentially you can become a CIEH affiliate with no requirement to do any CPD at that point. Then we've got this soft barrier here. And this soft barrier is the soft barrier to training, because of course we are struggling financially to be able to train staff. It's a really big problem. But if you can get through that barrier, you could potentially do a degree or apprenticeship or an environmental health degree, or possibly a postgrad MC, MSc or doctorate. You can do an 18-month apprenticeship course, or the private sector housing intervention group course, which is 1 year. There's a two-way arrow there, because this yellow thing here, this yellow arrow here, represents work. It represents the type of work that we're doing. So we could be doing compliance visits, HHSRS licensing, housing regulation. It's just indicative. And and our education and our experiential learning feeds into what's going on here along this trajectory. So of course there's two-way arrows from all the educational bits here. And And then the green bits here are where CPD kicks in. If you get to that point in your career, if you're a student, you're a CIH student, there's no requirement for CPD. You can become a housing and health practitioner from doing the private sector housing intervention group course. There's a professional register, but there's no requirement for CPD, but you can go on to become an associate or become an ordinary member at that point. And then there's chartered status, there's fellowship, and all of that feeds into this work that we do. Of course, the degree, you know, from the degree you can go and do the learning portfolio. But a weird thing is happening in local authorities. Some local authorities have said that actually they want to take graduates on, but they don't actually want to encourage people to do the learning portfolio because there's no wider roles for them in local authorities after they reach that point. And it's almost like they don't want to fund CPD, which I found quite worrying. But some people have said that, and it's because of the sort of the financial pressures that we have. So that's the education and experiential learning side of it. And I'm going to break some of this down a little bit more. So Karl Popper's 3 worlds is another element of influence on my work. It talks about a solid world. World 1, where the world where things are solid and real. So if you're thinking about it in housing inspection terms, we inspect properties, we see damp and mold, we see disrepair. They're physical things in the real world. World 2 is the psychological and mental effects, if you like, of what that is. So world, you know, the effect of the detrimental effect it has on occupiers, and perhaps the effect it has on landlords, which is not, you know, not a good thing at all. And then we've got world 3, which is this abstract world of social construction, where we are risk assessing, and we are creating laws, and we are serving notices, and then we're possibly going to court, and we are sort of defending our decisions. And it all comes from you know, from what we've seen in World 1. And these things interrelate. They're actually they kind of overlap. Kolb's reflective cycle is here as well, because that's quite an important part of it. If you are a reflective learner, you will probably be using this quite a lot. So Kolb's very similar. He talks about the concrete experience, and he's not talking about housing when he says that. He's talking about the physical world, reflective observation of that world, abstract conceptualization, making sense of all of that, active experimentation as well. So for us, that could be the concrete experience, literally housing inspections, reflective observation, the HHSRS assessment, for example. That could be that. Abstract conceptualization is creating a notice or creating that risk assessment. And then active experimentation is when you serve that notice, because you don't know what's going to happen at that point. You serve the notice, landlord might comply, or he might just challenge it, go to appeal, or he might just bury his head in the sand. But either way, you're back to the concrete experience of possibly being in a tribunal or a court, having to explain all of that. And it's a cycle. Street level bureaucrats, Lipsky. This is a paper from Lipsky of 1980. He was talking about street level bureaucrats, people on the street who make street level decisions about other people. You know, working in local authorities. This was in New York, and the term street level bureaucrats was something I considered using for this thesis, but in the end I came up with street level housing enforcers, and it's coined after Lipsky. So social construction, this is what we're involved in all the time when we are legislating against criminal landlords. And you can superimpose Kolb's cycle of reflection onto Popper's 3 worlds, and it kind of gels together. So that's just another thought, really, and all of these things overlap. So this is from Harris, Cowan and Marsh, another a paper that was influential on my thinking. It talks about different types of regulation. So look at how local authorities enforce the law aimed at tackling low standards in the private rented sector, and local authorities, how they adopt and they combine formal and informal approaches. So there's different kinds. So at one end of the spectrum, you've got light touch, informal based, occasional enforcement. You've got people who are compliance focused, who rely upon collaboration and formal action that's kept in reserve. The other extreme is hardline enforcement and prosecution, no informality. In reality, I don't think there's any local authority that actually just does that. We probably drift between a lot of these. And you've got creative approaches, holistic strategies to address homelessness and poverty, enforcement and alternative regulatory methods, and using collaborative partnerships. So very often we kind of drift between all of these things. So I did a survey as part of the research, trying to find out what, how many people, what people's views were on enforcement. 45% indicated a preference for informal action, 38% had a preference for formal action, and 17% indicated a nuanced approach where they used both. But the group most likely to initiate enforcement action were respondents with a relevant undergraduate or master's degree, as well as having completed the HHSRS training course. So we asked people about their educational background, and those who favoured informal action, very interestingly, when they were asked about what further training they needed, most of them were saying they wanted formal training. They wanted training in RIPA, in preparing for tribunals, in housing and legal training, or enforcement refreshers, or serving notices and enforcing law. A lot of them were that they favoured informal action, but they wanted formal training. And so some of them also wanted to go on to do the degree, and they also wanted a few things, sort of technical things, structural training, fire safety, and things like that, and damp and mould and things like that. But it was quite an interesting finding. So it kind of begged the question, well, is it that you prefer informality because you don't know enough to be able to feel confident enough to engage formally? So this was a line of inquiry. So I did speak to quite a lot of people in the focus groups from different backgrounds at the beginning of their career, in the middle of their career, reaching retirement, and got quite a lot of different views. Now, if you take away, if this barrier exists and you take away all the educational stuff and all of the CIH, CPD requirements and all of that stuff, you're left with this. People coming in with transferable skills, they're doing the 2-day course, they've got short courses, they're shadowing experienced officers, and they're kind of on this wheel here, and they're working through here. And eventually, I guess we will let them loose to go and do their work. So one of the questions I had was, does experiential learning in housing enforcement make up for the difficulties in finding and funding good training courses for officers to attend? And the answer, generally speaking, was no, it doesn't. Because yes, you can do the HHSRS course, but that doesn't give you a background in construction. So when you go out and you're inspecting properties and looking at defects, if you don't understand how those things were built and what the typical things that can go wrong with them are, then it's very difficult to be able to take that any further forward. So it is making, it's like trying to do it with a missing piece of the puzzle. So just bringing in the education, just a bit of the CIH workforce survey again as a reminder. Majority of, there was still in 2020, there was still 12.5% of the workforce was non-EHPs or specialists. 10.1 was fully qualified EHPs. It's probably gone down a bit, I would suspect. And then we've got graduates, sort of 1.1% there. Total of in there. And of course, we've got these problems with difficult in recruiting officers, recruitment freezes, salaries not being competitive enough, and local authorities having vacancies that were left unfilled for 6 months or more. And in the meantime, recruiting from other areas, because they're no longer it used to be that perhaps having, for certain jobs in housing, it would be, having an environmental health degree, having the CIH membership were considered to be essential criterions. And now it's very rare that you get people with those applying for most housing positions. That's the word I was getting back from the interviews and focus groups. And so people coming in from different areas and perhaps sitting on this sort of treadmill here and not really being able to progress any further. And it's a bit of a worry for us as a profession. It's a duplicate slide there. Sorry about that. Okay, so this is another interesting paper. It's by McCall and a few other people, and it's basically a paper that came out after Grenfell and the fallout from the Awabi shark tragedy. I'm going to put this into the chat because it is an interesting read for anyone who wants further reading. And what it is basically they've concluded that in social housing, they need to upskill social housing workers because of the way that the lack of empathy they had for people complaining about their conditions at Grenfell, worried about the cladding, and of course people like the shark family, who of course have problems with damp and mold, and they're not dealing with them properly. And so they have to upskill social housing, and they want people to have a discipline of being able to reflect. So Kolb's cycle of reflection is here again. Concrete experience, reflective observation, abstract conceptualization, active experimentation, and to have empathy. And my worry is that if we can't allow people through this barrier to train more, we are possibly going to go the same way as social housing, and we're possibly leading to a disaster waiting to happen. So one of the questions, of course, I had was, is there still a place for reflective practice, critical reflection, and solidarity in the role of the street level housing enforcer? And of course, it's very important. It's very important to have that lifelong learning attitude, to be able to know that, legislation changes, situations change. No house is exactly the same as any other. So, you have to draw on lots of experiential experience and educational knowledge to be able to navigate your way through what is a very, very complicated thing to regulate. And the reality is, if you do want to get people through that barrier, you've got to sort of, open the purse strings. Your HHSRS course, of course, can cost between £325 to £499 at the moment, depending on who you go to. You can get funding, of course, for an apprenticeship degree, and you can get you've got the apprenticeship levy, of course, for the 18-month apprenticeship. The 1-year private sector housing intervention group course is about £4,625 at the moment. Your environmental health degree is £9,500 per annum, roughly, and if you want to do the CIH learning portfolio, it's £172. A lot of students who've gone through the degree are saying that they can't afford to fund themselves to do this, and the local authorities won't fund them to do the portfolio, but they want to do it. So this is a barrier. It's really, this lack of money is really creating a barrier. And is it sustainable? The sustainability of this, because it takes so long to train people up. The apprenticeship can take 4 years. 4 years. There's a full or part-time option. 3 years part-time on the degree, or 6 years full-time for the degree now. And then you've got to invest 18 months from the apprenticeship, or a 1-year course. So there's quite a lot, and in a way, it's a bit of a race against time, because at the other end of the spectrum, a lot of people who are quite experienced are now reaching retirement. And so there's, we need to be able to fill that gap before it's too late. This is just a thing called the allegory of the long spoons. This is what I think of when I look at that slide. We've got this idea at the moment that, Manchester have done a really good thing where they've funded apprenticeships across the local authorities in Manchester to try to upskill themselves as a profession. We talk about growing our own, but very often it's very insular. We're only talking about our own local authority. And when I started as an environmental health technical officer over 20 years ago, and I was doing my degree, they said to me, they said, you're probably when you graduate, you're probably going to go off to another local authority. And I hadn't thought about that. I didn't really thought, I thought I was going to stay where I was. So that there might not be a thing for you. You might want to go and look somewhere else. And that's okay. If you go somewhere else, that's okay, because we'll get somebody else from somewhere else. And that's how it works. We all help to train each other up. But we lately, last few years, I don't think we have that anymore. We've got people who are saying, people in the focus groups are saying that they invest money in apprenticeships, and people do the 18-month apprenticeship and then they go off and work somewhere else. And they were very resentful about this. After all that time and money. But at one point, we were all helping each other. And so the allegory of the long spoons is this definition of hell. It's a parable. It's used in Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, and other cultures as well. And it's basically this bowl of soup. In Chinese, it's a rice bowl, and you've got these heavy long spoons, or in Chinese, it's these long chopsticks. And you can't feed yourself. However much you try to get this food into your mouth, it's unwieldy and it goes everywhere. You can't feed yourself. But the way out of the hell is to feed each other. So you dip your spoon into the bowl and you feed the person opposite you, and together you sort of grow. So that's the way I kind of see the problem right now. We have this skill shortage. We have the reality of having to invest in a profession and growing a profession rather than just trying to grow people in our own place. It's great to recruit and retain staff, of course, but if they don't, we have to think about it in a wider picture. So pretty much I'm sort of at the conclusions, really. We need to focus on growing the profession in accord with the needs of our service. We need to support training and development of frontline staff. We need to have this lifelong learning ethos. We also need peer review, leadership, and followership, which is very important because we need to think about succession. So leadership and followership is quite an interesting cultural dynamic, and it can work quite well in the education and experiential learning spectrum, because you've got, if you're a lifelong learner and you're working in a local authority, and there are opportunities to step up, maybe to stand in for a team leader, or to coordinate some kind of projects or multi-agency operation, you are encouraging leadership and in the people that are working. And so it's essentially sort of kind of succession planning by stealth, because these things can be tacit and they're not very well articulated. But we do need to think about who are tomorrow's leaders going to be. Who do we want them to be? We need a professional development that is fit for purpose. We need a skilled and knowledgeable profession that people want to be part of. And we need to think beyond the confines of our own regulatory authority in order for our profession to survive, and whatever that profession looks like, whether it is part of an organization like the CIEH, whether it's something else, whatever it needs to be fit for purpose. So I don't have all the answers to give you today. I'm still in the middle of writing this up, but essentially, that's where we are. That's where we are. We've got all of these things that we have to deal with. We've got a problem with recruitment, we've got a problem with retention, we've got a problem with training, and of course we've got people who are experienced people who are going to be retiring quite soon. And across the spectrum, it paints quite a bleak picture. And the only way to really think about resolving it is to think about models of leadership and followership in the profession. So it's kind of, I think I've got to the end of that. That's 45 minutes.
trying to come back in there. Thank you, Paul. Brilliant. Thank you. That was fascinating. And we've literally got loads of questions and comments coming in there to speak to you about. I'm just going to touch on the poll results with you, Paul. I don't think it'll be a surprise to you that in terms of confidence in enforcing the Renters' Right Act, only 6% of the people attending said yes, they felt confident, and the rest were either no or don't know. And I think that's probably reflective of quite a lot of what you've found in your research there. You know, if authorities are already struggling, you know, how are they going to kind of make use of these extra powers? I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, but it's obviously going to be a big challenge.
It is a massive challenge. I mean, the renters' rights, I was looking at it. I've held off from looking at it now that it's with the Lords, because there's just so many things going to change. But it was interesting to note that the renters' rights originally wanted to have a 24 hours notification if you wanted to inspect properties under renters' rights. So I thought that there was some scenarios that the central government provided for this. So one of them might be that a landlord didn't register with the database, and a tenant's complained about the property. So it eventually comes to the local authority to investigate if they presumably they're going to be sending warning letters or whatever it is they do. The landlord doesn't comply, and then it's up to the local authority to go out to prove that it's a rented property and that they failed to register on the database, and then we can issue civil financial penalties. But at the root of it originally was a tenant complaining. They probably complained about something like damp and mold or excess cold. Don't know. That doesn't say in the scenario. So what do we do about that? We've got to do an HHSRS if we're going to take that on as well. And it's almost like we carry on business as usual in that scenario. I would say do an HHSRS, find out what the complaint was in the first place. Then, you know, it's very simple to find out from a tenant if they're renting or not. You know, just a tenancy agreement or whatever standard of proof for the standard of proof, and then you've got the civil financial penalty to issue against the landlord for failing to register with the database, and then you've probably got an improvement notice to serve for damp and mold or whatever it might be. And so I think we can swallow some of this work, but it's dependent on the database working. If they don't there's no much detail on who's doing the database and when that's going to be ready. So when the bill comes in, it is difficult to see how what parts of it we can regulate initially. Probably harassment and illegal eviction can probably be something that we could start to address, but it's very resource intensive for local authorities. Already we don't have many people, you know, we don't have many people in local authorities apart from tenancy relation officers if you've got them to be able to do that. But it's problematic. And the other thing is of course recovering the money. Recovering the money is already problematic with civil financial penalties, and recovering it within the financial year with enough time to be able to use it, to redistribute, to be able to use it for further enforcement is also problematic. And sometimes we have some local authorities having to spend a lot of money to actually recover it. So it does raise a lot of questions, and just giving us more legislation to use with our regulation doesn't really solve the problem if we don't have enough people to actually administer and do the work.
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. And people are already saying, like you say, that they don't have enough people and money. And in fact, in terms of the words that were shared in the final poll question, you know, staffing and recruitment concerns was right up there in terms of people's biggest challenges, resource and funding, legal support. So I think none of that is going to be a surprise to you based on your research. A couple of the other things that came up were decisions of the FTT, an increase in criminal landlords, and an increase in claiming home loss payments. So kind of a few newer ones creeping in there as well, making things more challenging generally. I don't know if that's something that came up within your research.
Yes, very much so. That there is quite a lot of difficulty. I mean, we interestingly we have quite a lot of resources at our fingertips as it is already to be able to use research towards formulating policy, and some local authorities are better at it than others. And it's and this is what I mean about the invisibility of the profession, because for so long we had statutory duties, and we didn't really have to report much, report back on it much, apart from outcomes. But now things are getting a bit more complicated. We do get a lot of we're getting a lot more challenges, not just from landlords but also from tenants as well, about the decisions that we make. And some of this stems back to whether we regulate formally or informally, and some obviously tenants who have been regulated informally might feel a bit hard done by. And then, of course, we have got this issue with the financial issue if we do prohibit a property, of then having to find somewhere else for them to live. And the ironic thing is that sometimes, because of our duty to house and the housing crisis, and the fact that there is a scarcity of affordable, decent accommodation out there, we might, chances are we probably housed those people in that situation in the first place. And then we, on the one hand, we're doing that, and I literally did one last week in a selective licensing area. I've just done an EPA on it because it was absolutely horrendous. There's water dripping through the ceilings, for heaven's sake, and there's no electricity and all the rest of it. And they were housed by the local authority. So on the one hand, you're creating work for us, the housing solutions people will say, and actually you created work for me because you put them in there in the first place. And so we're getting these tussles, and it's not helpful to have these tussles. We need to know we have got a problem. Collectively, we need to try to work out how to deal with it, rather than trying to shift things onto each other, because that's not how partnership working works. Because that does happen a lot as well. When you talk about partnership working, some people in local authorities say, well, actually, whenever I've tried it, it's just like, it just seems to be, how can they dump the problem onto private sector housing and wash their hands of it? So it's not helpful unless you actually work from a mutual goal that you want, and then you work steps back to how you're going to develop that partnership to work. But yeah, it is a problem. But what can you do if you've got, if that property is not livable and they've got to move into somewhere else, and they're going to need, they're going to need rehousing, and they're entitled to some kind of compensation, and then they're going to get it. The renters' rights, interestingly, will have another claim for compensation as well. It looks like, and I'm not quite sure about this, but I think it is a claim that a tenant can make against a landlord if they have to be rehoused. But it's after the event. They still have to go through the trauma of being moved out. They could be illegally evicted. They could, whatever it might be, or that it could be a prohibition order, and and those landlords then are using Section 6 or under the revised legislation to move them out because we prohibited a property. There is a means for them to claim compensation as well under that. So we'll have to see what that looks like. That was a kind of a last minute thing when it was still in the House of Commons, that brought in by Angela Rayner very quickly. But yeah, sometimes there are no comfortable, good solutions, only better or worse ones.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to kind of tie in a few questions together here that I've had about training, and there's sort of this disparity between a struggle with recruitment, so needing to get people into the profession quickly, and providing sort of like training for people to become housing officers that aren't environmental health officers, but also then there's sort of like barriers to progression for
Yeah.
them within that role, so maybe not being able to move in or progress to higher posts within the local authority, but as well, how do we balance that against keeping increasing the visibility of the environmental health profession, and that kind of being an EHO in all of those areas.
So it's quite interesting because it depends on how you frame problems, because leaders and councillors in local authorities, they rely on the private sector housing teams really to give them the information so that they can frame situations politically. And it's whether how good or how bad we are at collating data and interpreting it. And the irony is that that most graduates who come into work in local authorities have been taught analytical skills. And we've sort of approached, like, people when we've asked them about this before. Well, you need to get this data together. Why don't you get people who really understand how to analyze and how to do it? And but it's at the opportunity cost of getting them out to go and do inspections, and usually a huge backlog of cases. So it's something that a lot of local authorities say they don't have the luxury of being able to do, but we do have. It's not. We do have quite a lot there. We've got, we can go to council tax. We can find out exactly how many private rented properties we've got. We can then sort of look at the English housing survey. We can then look at, what they're saying about the statistics on damp and mold and excess cold and fire safety and stuff like that, overcrowding for your area, and you can extrapolate that data if you've got the figures and work out the likelihood. I mean, I've done it for a local authority that I'm in at the moment, and our damp and mold in this local authority is 1 in 500. The likelihood is 1 in 500 for damp and mold across that borough, all tenures. And it's very easy, and you can get that data, and it's how you present it. We measure outputs quite a lot, but they're not outcomes. We confuse outputs with outcomes. The amount of notices you serve, the amount of prosecutions you do, these are outputs. They're not. The outcome is really perhaps what impact that has on the occupier. And with selective licensing, discretionary licensing, there is a time lag. And we're starting to find out there are a couple of papers and research on it now that are showing that the original selective licensing schemes in places like Newham, now that they're in their third one now. Some of that, there's a lot of data now that shows the correlation between improved health, but it takes a long time to come through, and it's understanding that and understanding what the figures are showing. We can show decreases in antisocial behaviour a lot quicker than we can health impacts with licensing schemes. But it's how we frame it. And also the other thing is, some local authorities might think, well, what is the problem in the local authority? And they might, if I just go back to my slide here, the beginning, my messy map, they might think, okay, the problem is we've got a housing crisis, and we've got a duty to house, and we've got lots of homelessness applications, and perhaps we've got lots of damp and mold as well, and that's our problem. But actually those are symptoms, and if you confuse symptoms with causes, then your data is going to be skewed, because actually what are the causes of that? So the causes of the housing crisis are effectively, on the one hand, it's bad landlords neglecting their properties and causing a lot of problems. And if their tenants complain about it, they chuck them out. That's the actual root cause, or one of the root causes. And so it's understanding how to frame those problems, how to present those to policymakers, to be able to then, get a true picture of what's going on. So with social construction, there is a kind of weird thing with they talk about multiple realities, like not to get all Marvel movie alternative realities. It's not that kind of thing, but it basically means that reality is not absolute. It's set within social processes, and it's how it's knowledge. It's built on knowledge, and it's built on consensus. And and actually there can be multiple realities. So if you choose to construct a reality where you confuse the symptoms with the causes, then you're probably likely to end up in a position where you are regulating informally, because you are very conscious that you're reliant on the private rented sector to house the homeless. But if you are doing it from the root causes and thinking, okay, you're good landlords, we give you a light touch. You're bad landlords, we're going to go after you formally and we're going to deal with you. And you articulate this properly and you put it to policymakers properly, then you are going to find that then you change the dynamic. And that's what that's what licensing, when it's done proactively and it's done strongly, can do.
Yeah, a great answer. And actually, when you think about those problems, and you saying that, the ultimate cause is the bad landlords, and we've talked a lot about, training officers. Actually, someone mentioned in the chat, where does landlord training fit into this? Actually, can we make landlords carry out mandatory training to like we would have a basic food hygiene certificate to work in, to be a food business operator? Maybe you need a basic landlord training to operate a rented property.
But the weird thing is, I think that would be useful. But even if we don't have that, we've got property. If the property database, in theory, everything's got to go on there. So in theory, perhaps preparing licenses in the future is going to be, is going to be much easier, because we can extrapolate a lot of data for preparing that draft license. But we can also look at that, and if the public, I think if the public can view it as well, then they'll be able to see, okay, this landlord's got an electrical certificate, they've got gas safety certificate, they've got an EPC, and it can help them to make informed choices. A lot of the time, when I was dealing with disrepair in licensable areas, I'd often tell tenants to look at the council's property licensing database if they're going to look at a property, to see whether it's actually got a license and whether it's actually on there. I'm not quite sure. I think the rogue landlord database is going to be incorporated with the property database. So if there's anything that's gone on in any kind of history of enforcement, it may well be readily apparent. The interesting, I think it'll be, that the thing was, this would be very useful for helping to inform data, not just for academics, I think, as well as local authorities, and being able to share data across different local authorities, because of course landlords don't just operate in one place. And so, ironically, I mean, just to give you an example, I did an EPA and closed down a property last Friday, I think it was, no, the week before, and over the weekend, he hadn't licensed his property. He put in a license application, and it's so quick now with the licensing tools they'd got. I'd had a day off on Monday. I'm coming on the Tuesday, and they'd also already sent him a draft license, and I'd say, "Excuse me, I've just done an EPA," so they had to withdraw that, revoke it, and refund him his money, because it's not habitable at the moment, and until he sorts that out, it's going to remain prohibited. But having it all on a database that we refer to regularly might actually sort of alleviate issues like that, where the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing.
And that will be our hope for the future then.
Yeah.
I'll leave it there. So apologies for overrunning, and sorry we haven't had chance to answer all of your questions. We will follow up in RIAM's communities as usual. And our next housing roundtable is scheduled for Tuesday the 2nd of December, and our guest speaker will be Professor John Edwards, talking about damp and mould in buildings and how to assess risks and find the right solutions. So thank you, Paul, for a fascinating presentation today. Thanks to all our audience for your engagement in the chat and asking questions, and thanks to Jeremy, our RIAM's chief editor, and Tanya for the technical support, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much, everyone.